Hello friends, welcome to my channel. I Dr. Gopal B. Saraswat welcome you all to my channel. Today the topic for discussion is testing of hypothesis. आज हम बात करेंगे hypothesis को कैसे टेस्ट करते हैं और उसके लिए what are the different things that we need to require to know before proceeding to test hypothesis. So let's start this video. Hypothesis testing involves inferential statistics. This means that you are trying to take inference out of a population based upon the sample that you have collected from the population. So आप population ली, आपने उस population में से एक sample लिया, sample में आपने data है, data के basis पर you are just trying to take inference on the basis of data, or you are making an inquiry on data. On the basis of that inquiry, you are just trying to making investigation and inferences. So this is what this hypothesis testing involves. Further, on the basis of statistical analysis, the process of this testing of hypothesis can be divided into three groups: univariate statistical analysis, bivariate statistical analysis, and multivariate statistical analysis. Univariate means when you are trying to testing a hypothesis which involving only one variable. Bivariate involving two variables, and multivariate involving more than two variables, or you can say that it is a hypothesis where you might come across a situation यहाँ पर आपके पास दो से ज़्यादा independent variables हैं और एक आपके पास dependent variable. So that becomes a multivariate statistical hypothesis. There are different types of hypotheses we generally test in the business research. First is relational hypothesis. This hypothesis examines the change in one variable, how it vary with the change in another. So you are just trying to identify a causality of one variable due to another. And this hypothesis is usually tested by assessing the covariance in any manner using the regression analysis. So this is known as we are just trying to find out a relation with between the hypothesis. तो जब आप relation find out करते हैं, you try to implement the regression analysis where you may implement the correlation, covariance, and different other tools of the regression analysis. Second type of hypothesis is hypothesis about difference between the groups. In this case, we are just trying to have groups from the population, and these groups which we just have on the basis of certain characteristics, we are trying to find out whether two groups are same or different. And these hypotheses are very common in causal designs. So this is we are trying to find the difference between the groups. The third type of hypothesis is hypothesis about differences from some standard. You already had a standard and now you are just trying to test the hypothesis on the basis of that standard. For example, आप के पास एक यूनिवर्सिटी है, यूनिवर्सिटी के अंदर यू आर हैविंग अराउंड 5000 स्टूडेंट and the average marks of the 5000 students, let's say, that is around 54%, and that is the standard that you are maintaining. So now you just took a sample from this population of the university and you are just trying to match whether the sample or the group of students उनके एवरेज मार्क्स क्या उनके एवरेज मार्क्स भी नियर बाय 54% है या नहीं. So in this case you are just trying to compare one sample from a standard, and a standard has been maintained on the basis of population. So when you have such kind of thing, that is known as hypothesis about differences from some standard. So this means that we have a three sort of hypothesis. One where we try to find out a relation, another difference between groups, and the third difference from a standard. These are the three types of hypothesis we generally use in the business research. Further, hypothesis, as a name suggests, means assumption. We make certain assumptions and we test it. Either that assumption may be true or the assumption may be false, but we are looking to test it. That is known as hypothesis. There are three types of hypothesis we generally have. One is the null hypothesis, alternate hypothesis, and the third one is one-tailed or two-tailed hypothesis. Null hypothesis means a hypothesis which indicates status quo or equanimity. You are saying everything is at par. No one is superior, no one is inferior. In such scenario, this is considered as everything as par. This is null hypothesis. So, for example, there is no effect of advertisement expenditure on sales. So, this is null hypothesis. For example, a boy and a girl, they both are in a want to be in a relationship. A boy want to be in a relationship, you can say that. Boy proposes a girl, will you marry me? The girl reject the null hypothesis. What is null? Null hypothesis says that if here you can see that I reject the status quo, so there is now a change in our status to engage to be married. If she says yes, so she is rejecting the status quo or she is rejecting the null hypothesis. If she is saying yes, yes means I am accepting, yes, we are having a relationship now and this relationship is status to engage to be married. So, will you marry me is the first initial question where this boy is looking to change the status quo. Status quo is no relationship. Once the girl says yes, the status quo is now changed and now they both are in a relationship. We call it status to engage to be married. So, if yes is the answer, the hypothesis get rejected. Hypothesis is null hypothesis, there is no relationship. But if she says yes, there is a relationship and null hypothesis got rejected. Alternate hypothesis. Rejection of null hypothesis itself gives acceptance to the alternate hypothesis. One-tailed or two-tailed hypothesis. One-tailed, two-tailed hypothesis, these hypotheses are based upon the normality curve, where we have a normal curve where probability density is around 100%. So, here in the center of this curve, the mean is 0. So, this means that this curve is divided into two equal parts, 50% in the left, 50% in the right. If you are testing a null hypothesis which is saying the status quo or taking the both parts of this curve, that is known as a hypothesis which is null or two-tailed hypothesis. If you are only testing a one individual part of the particular curve, either right or left, that will be a one-tailed hypothesis. Two-tailed, you are testing both sides, right and left. And in one-tailed, you are testing only single side at a time. So, for example, if your hypothesis is that null hypothesis you are taking and the null hypothesis is that your standard is, let's say, population mean is greater than a particular value. So, this means that you are just testing the right hand side of this curve and that is one-tailed hypothesis. If your alternate hypothesis is HA means alternate, H0 means null. So, if your alternate hypothesis is the mean of the population which is known as mu is less than a particular value of the sample, this is you are just trying to test the left hand side of this curve which is again a one-tailed hypothesis. But if you are saying mu is not equal to a particular value, so this means that you are testing both sides of the tails. So this is how the one-tailed, two-tailed hypotheses are being explained. For example, the null hypothesis is H0 mu is equal to 300 ml. Just what does it mean? In a production plant of Coke, the production managers just got a tip off from a lower level employee that in the production plant, especially the filling plant, the bottling plant in that where the Coke is being filled, देयर इज अ कंप्लेन कि वहां पर पता लग रहा है कि जो बॉटल हमारी 300 ml की है या केन हमारी 300 ml की है, उसमें वर्कर्स 300 ml से कम वहां पर कोक को फिल कर रहे हैं. दिस इज जस्ट अ सम टिप ऑफ रिसीव्ड बाय द प्रोडक्शन मैनेजर. तो ही इज विलिंग टू टेस्ट कि ऐसा तो नहीं है कि कंपनी में लोग इस तरह से कुछ काम कर रहे हैं. He wants to test this hypothesis क्या वास्तव में 300 ml ही सभी बॉटल्स में या केन्स में फिल की जा रही है या उससे कम फिल की जा रही है. बिकॉज आइदर वे कंपनी इज लूजिंग. हाउ? अगर कंपनी के वर्कर्स 300 ml से ज्यादा कोक फिल करते हैं तो कंपनी की कॉस्ट इंक्रीज होती है, और 300 ml से कम फिल करते हैं तो कंपनी की कॉस्ट इन रेस्पेक्ट ऑफ कस्टमर, क्योंकि कंपनी का कस्टमर कहेगा company is claiming 300 ml but the quantity we are receiving is less than 300 ml, so company की brand value impact होती है. So either way company has to lose. So how you are going to test this hypothesis? So let's say if you are just want to test whether the all bottles that the company production manager just identified a sample, let's say he just took a sample out of the whole production and say कि sample में check करो that all bottles are not having a 300 ml. This is the alternate two-tailed hypothesis. Alternate hypothesis two-tailed. Mu is not equal to 300 ml. Means all bottles are not having 300 ml. Maybe less, maybe higher. If you are saying no, the hypothesis is कि हमारी सभी bottles के अंदर 300 ml drink available है, that is you can say a null hypothesis. Alternate, not having 300 ml. One-tailed hypothesis, all bottles are having greater than 300 ml. This is one-tailed because you are just testing the right hand side of the curve. If you are saying all bottles are having less than 300 ml, again a one-tailed, but you are testing the left hand side of the curve, normal curve. So this indicates that how the hypothesis is being framed in respect to a particular production plant in business research. So when we test hypothesis, we have to understand the concept of errors. Generally, what error we are talking about here, just see this particular curve. What we generally do, we either accept a hypothesis or reject a hypothesis. This is the only two things we do. Hypothesis can be true or hypothesis can be false. Let's say if hypothesis is true, what should be the decision? The correct decision is you accept your hypothesis. So this is correct decision. If null hypothesis is true and you are accepting this hypothesis, so this means that this is a correct decision. Let's say if your hypothesis is true, but because of some issue or because of some negligence or because of some data error, because of your observation or finding, आपने ट्रू हाइपोथेसिस को रिजेक्ट कर दिया, यू रिजेक्टेड द ट्रू हाइपोथेसिस, वी कॉल इट टाइप 1 एरर. सिमिलरली अगर आपकी हाइपोथेसिस या नल हाइपोथेसिस इज फॉल्स, सो करेक्ट डिसीजन इज रिजेक्ट. बट आपने एक नल हाइपोथेसिस व्हिच वाज फॉल्स बट यू एक्सेप्टेड इट, दैट इज टाइप 2 एरर. So we generally come across a situation where we either rejected a hypothesis which is obviously true, so type 1 error we encounter with, or we rejected a hypothesis which is we accepted a hypothesis which is false. So this is type 2 error. So when a hypothesis is true but you reject it, this is type 1 error. When hypothesis is false but you accepted it, this is type 2 error. So type 1 error is denoted by alpha. Alpha is the denomination for this particular type of hypothesis. Type 2 error is denoted by beta. And the power of test here is 1 minus beta. So generally you see alpha. Alpha is significance level. Significance level, you can say, generally most of the studies are having 5% significance level. Some are having 1% or 10% significance level. So this means we are just testing our hypothesis on the basis of this significance level, on this particular value of alpha. This is the error, or this is the level of type 1 or type 1 error we are accepting in our hypothesis testing कि इतनी error हो सकती है. Let's see this. So these are the two types of errors. For example, let's say a person is guilty. तो उसको क्या होना चाहिए था? Correct decision is verdict must be, तो उसको guilty prove होना चाहिए. But एक person guilty है and the verdict comes कि उसको innocent बोल दिया गया. The person is innocent. So this is type 1 error. Similarly, a person is innocent और verdict आ गया कि he is being proven as guilty. आपने एक निर्दोष को guilty बना दिया. This is type 2 error. So this is how this errors and their types play a very important role in hypothesis testing. Next one is level of significance. Level of significance denotes the probability of rejecting the null hypothesis. So significance level is probability associated with a statistical hypothesis that indicates how likely it is that an inference supporting a difference between observed value and some statistical expectation. आपकी expectation और observed value में जो difference आने के chances हैं, that probability, the chance of that probability is your significance level. So significance level we have either 1%, 5% or 10%. For this we generally calculate a probability value, we call it p value, and this is essentially another name of the significance level, and significance level, as I earlier mentioned, that means alpha, the type 1 error. These are the steps of testing of hypothesis. First you set up a hypothesis, you set up a suitable significance level, you either pick 1%, 5% or 10% level of significance. You determine the statistics, how you are going to test your hypothesis. You determine the critical reason, how you are going to accept or reject a hypothesis based upon critical reason. Then you will compute the value of test statistics and the probability, and finally you make a decision whether to accept a hypothesis or reject a hypothesis. To test a hypothesis, we have a different tools. Generally, we have a first tool as a t-test, second tool is z-test, third f-test, and the fourth one is regression. We generally use these several tests for hypothesis testing. But this is not all. Use of statistical test, as I just mentioned, z-test, t-test, f-test or regression analysis. These statistical tests used in hypothesis testing depends upon the level of measurement of a variable, sample size what you are having, normality of your data, and the objective of your research study. And these are the different parameters on the basis of which you generally decide which statistical test to apply. But majority of tests makes decision for the hypothesis whether it is accepted or rejected based upon the test calculated value and the test table value. If the test calculated value is less than the table value or the critical reason, we accept hypothesis, otherwise reject hypothesis. Further, you also make decision based upon the probability value. If your significance level is 5% or your probability value as you are expecting is 5%, if your hypothesis, what you are trying to test, if the value of probability of that hypothesis test is greater than 5%, you accept. If this is less than 5%, you reject the hypothesis. This is the basis for accepting and rejecting a hypothesis based on probability. This is just opposite what we just had in the previously based upon the actual value and critical value. So this is all from my side. I hope you like my video. Thank you for watching.